Hello and welcome to another edition of PRA. I'm your host David Russell and I'm here with my co-host Travis Worth of RTB. What's up, Travis?
Hey, what's going on, David? Yeah, I'm super stoked to be officially on the Reasons to Believe team now, and I'm also stoked to be a part of this debate discussion. I really like cosmological arguments. In fact, the contingency is actually one of my favorite arguments. So,
Right on, right on. Well, guys, we've got two special guests here with you today. One that you know, his name is Rich Harkness. Say hi, Rich.
Hi, everybody. Rich here.
Yeah, we met on Skeptics and Seekers, and you were like, "Hey, I'd like to come on sometime." So we got you somebody to talk to about the problem of evil, wasn't it?
It's been fun. Yeah, with Aaron. Yes.
it was,
Yeah, it was a great time, man.
Mhm.
But we also have Blake Giunta, who is the man behind the awesome website Belief Map. Say hi, Blake.
Hello, hello.
So yeah, Blake, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and Belief Map?
So I work part-time as a Christian apologist, so I'm really interested in helping people think about God and reasons to believe. It played a big role in my being able to believe, and so it's a way for me to kind of serve others. And yeah, Belief Map is a tool that I came up with in trying to help um, people have efficient discussions, because people tread a lot of the same territory over and over. So I thought, hey, what if I just map out all the characteristic responses and counter responses, even down to the academic level, and I can help people kind of explore the questions in a way that helps them get the best answers and get it really quickly. So that's beliefmap.org, and I've been working on it for a long time. And so I think
Yeah,
it's got over 1,000 academic citations by now, and it focuses mainly on the question of God's existence and Jesus's resurrection.
yeah, I noticed, man. You have a ton of citations, man, and that's why I loved it. I've used it several times when
Oh, cool.
preparing for debates and stuff like that. So, and just for general
yeah.
research, just to like, hey, you know what? I know where to go to get a citation. I'm going to go to Belief Map. It's a great site, guys. I challenge everybody to check it out. Blake does a great job with it, man. And again, thank you for it, for even my understanding, man. It's helped me out. So you have a fan here, bud. So
That's cool. Thank you.
yes, sir. But we're going to talk about cosmology and causality and if God fits the bill. And I'm really glad that Rich responded to this, because I love the way he thinks about things like this. And he was like, yeah, I want to know why people think God is the fits that bill. So I was going to open the floor up. This is not like our normal style debate, but I will give you guys openings. And Blake, since you confirm it, I'll let you go first. You don't have to take 10 minutes or whatever, but you could just lay out why you think God fits the bill
Okay.
for cosmological arguments and causality arguments and stuff like that.
Cool. Well, first, just thank you, Richard, for having this conversation with me, man. David sent me one of your discussions with some. As I was listening to it, I thought instantly, hey, this is going to be a good guy to chat with. I can tell
Cool.
you know what you're talking about, and you have good, productive conversations, which isn't the case for everybody. So I thought you were really high quality as I was listening to you. So I'm glad to kind of hear what you think and go back and forth with you.
Great.
So okay, to begin, I wonder how if Richard picked the language of fits the bill, because when I think of fits the bill, I want to say, like, hey, trivially almost, if God exists, God fits the bill. Maybe what you want to say is like, is God the best explanation? I didn't know if maybe that's kind of what more we were going towards, because if God exists, then God's the entity with the powers and so forth that would of course be sufficient to produce the world. But you can still have the question about, hey, is God coherent in the first place, and is all of this coherent? So that's probably okay. And he's shaking his head, so it sounds
Yeah. It sounds good to me.
okay. Cool.
Yeah. I was just making it sound good.
Yeah, I get it, and that's why I
Right.
assumed it makes sense. Okay, but just getting in our philosopher mode when we get like hyper pedantic and whatnot, we just want to
Right.
check that out. Okay, and so I mean, really, it's gonna, if we're focusing on whether God is the best explanation, maybe it would. I want to find out a little bit more about Richard instead of kind of guessing what his objections are. Maybe I'd let him kind of share some problems with it. It might make sense to talk about what the arguments are first, though. Like, hey, what are cosmological arguments? It's a whole family of arguments. There's some, the classic one that gets a lot of attention on YouTube and stuff is William Lane Craig's version, the Kalam cosmological argument. And it says, not that everything has a beginning and a cause, but whatever begins to exist, that's a special class of things. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe begins to exist, and I think he can show that pretty successfully through philosophical argumentation. There are really powerful paradoxes that you run into, and arguably even a contradiction. Most philosophers will say it's a contradiction, this Grim Reaper paradox. If you try to deny or if you try to say that the past is infinite, you run into paradoxes. And then he'll, as a side note, say, hey, it actually fits with our best science as well. The idea of an absolute beginning. So whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2 says the universe began to exist. And then 3, therefore the universe has a cause. And then Craig will follow that up with, that's the Kalam core, but he'll follow that up with saying, okay, well, let's think about what kind of stuff, what kind of properties the cause would need to have. And very quickly, if the universe is space and time, then whatever caused the universe to exist or caused its beginning is obviously can't depend on space and time. So immediately you've got this really interesting cause that's, that can exist independently of space and time. That's fascinating. Already I would say it functions like a fulfilled prediction of theism. And there's a lot of, literature on this before we ever even knew to look for something so specific. People were saying that this kind of entity existed. And so that's a really powerful confirmed prediction, I would say. It counts, it's not a proof, but it counts in favor of the God hypothesis and in ways that, all contemporary physicists found fascinating. And some of them even resisted it and called it anti-scientific, the idea of a beginning, because it seemed to point too strongly to traditional notions of God. So on the one hand, I'd say, hey, it exists independently of time and space and matter as well. It's immaterial. And it can, of all things, it has both the disposition and ability to produce a universe. So anyways, you don't really need to elaborate too much. A lot of people instantly see the connection between this and the God hypothesis. Again, it functions as a fulfilled prediction, really specific fulfilled predictions of theism. But yeah, like I said, the cosmological arguments, it's a branch of argumentation, but there's a whole family of arguments. And like Travis mentioned, you've got sort of Leibnizian type arguments as well, which I really like a lot. And they focus on there's different ways to present it, but think of it like this, and then I'll turn it over to Richard to help think about reasons to think, hey, this maybe isn't God. But that sort of argumentation would say, hey, look, you've got all this stuff out here and it's contingent. What does that mean? Well, contingent stuff is stuff that exists but didn't have to exist. So like numbers, a lot of philosophers think that numbers exist. If they're right, if numbers do exist, they're necessary entities. They're not the kind of thing that just somebody made or that just popped into existence after a period of time. They're just like fixed as a necessary part of reality. But what about me? Am I necessary? Well, of course not. I could have failed to exist. If history had changed this or that way, then I wouldn't even be here. It's easy to conceive of a world, of a possible reality where I never came to be. Okay. And so now we have these two types of things. We have necessary things like numbers, and then contingent things like me and the planets and, the stuff on my desk. All that's contingent. And now we have to ask ourselves, consider all the contingent stuff put together, the big sum of contingent stuff. And now I'm going to give you a new premise. And the premise says, or whatever's contingent has a cause or has an explanation. Okay. Well, then that would apply to all the contingent stuff. But if this is literally all the contingent stuff, what is left to cause contingent stuff? trivially, it has to be something that's not contingent. It has to be necessary. So now you get a necessary cause of contingent reality, and that gets you all those same properties that I listed before, being independent of time and space and matter. But it also says the entity is necessary. And another spinoff, just real quick, is you can say that there's a first thing. If you can use some of the traditional argumentation for a first thing, then of course you have to have something prior to the first thing. And anyways, there's argumentation there that entity is going to have to be necessary as well. So those are kind of cosmological arguments. And again, the properties that you can get out of it are timeless, spaceless, immaterial, has the power to cause the universe or contingent stuff or the first contingent thing or contingent state. And, not just the power to, but the disposition to. So that's kind of where I'm coming in. I'm thinking, holy smokes, this is, in Bayesian confirmation theory, this is like serious confirmation of the theistic hypothesis. So anyways, that's where I see it right now. What do you think, Richard? Is it Rich or Richard?
Rich is good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
so,
you're good, man. Go.
Yeah. So thanks for that. So first of all, you stole my thunder a bit. I appreciate the kind words, but I was actually going to put them towards you too. I took a look at one of your debates with Stephen Woodward.
Okay.
And it's funny because I was going through it and I was trying not to look at Stephen's responses because I just didn't want those in my head to be things that just come out of me. Why repeat that kind of stuff? I heard a few things, but anyways, so I saw mostly your responses. But I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed your arguments and your style there, and I was very impressed. And I thought also this is a guy I would like to talk to and frankly learn from what I can too. I just wanted to put out that I'm certainly not in here thinking that I'm going to win a debate kind of thing. Yeah. Frankly, on the cosmological arguments, you've put in far more thought than I have. I've encountered them all before. I've done some debating of some of them before, but and I actually had started preparing some stuff, but it got unwieldy. So frankly, what I've mostly decided to do is on YouTube, it's filled with those reaction videos, like hardcore rapper reacts to the music of the Carpenters or something.
Yeah.
I'll just treat this as a sort of an atheist reacts video, to the cosmological. Nice. And so I'll just sort of bring my concerns as they arise. I just hope I can contribute something useful, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So to sort of, I guess to start off, this is almost like a meta comment that I don't necessarily want to get into, but I guess I just have an opportunity to say it, which is whenever I see, for instance, debates between atheists and Christians, anybody representing a revealed religion or Christians in particular, I have to say that it always strikes me as having an element of absurdity. Just because the fact that any Christian, even after God's revelation, ever feels the need to appeal to philosophical arguments to either bolster his own belief or persuade others in even a cumulative case, strikes me as really strange. Apparently God chose to reveal himself, and he's got a vitally important message for mankind, and yet here we are still debating the existence of God. And there's like this weird implication that I see almost happening, which was the Christians saying like, okay, God, thanks for the special revelation. You did your best trying to reveal your existence to humankind. But we're also going to have to sort of pick up these old, arguments from antiquity and polish them up and get those to bolster the case. It seems weird to me. But I'll just put that aside, sort of going on, because
we'll come back to that towards the end.
Sure. Yeah, because I think you have some arguments about divine hiddenness and all that kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and also, I'm not only interested in how you get like the attributes of God, such as personal God, from arguments like the Kalam, etc. But I'm really interested in the motivation at all for people coming from a revealed religion, such as Christianity in particular, for appealing to those arguments. And very often I see them appealed or referenced in debates, even for instance, for the debates about the resurrection, for instance. And so very commonly it will be, the objection from the atheists may be saying how incredibly unlikely it is from everything we know that anybody would be.
Just say it makes it, because here's what probably what's going to end up happening is, because I know that we're trying to keep the conversation on causation in the Kalam. What's probably going to end up happening is we're going to talk about that, and then I don't know if we're going to get around to this other stuff, and so they're just kind of going to be floating objections. And I'd be happy to come back and talk about them because they're rich, interesting topics, really, really important. I'm afraid that as soon as you finally get to the causation stuff, that we'll never get to talk about the other things. I don't know if you agree. It's just been my experience.
Sure, no problem. So the thing is, I'm sort of willing to. I've encountered the other cosmological arguments before and arguments from contingency, etc. But I sort of came in concentrating a bit more on the Kalam, at least to start off with, just because it gives something to focus on. Mm-hmm. And that's what I saw you present before or defend. And so I'm curious about how we get, of course, to the attributes of a God. And you gave some along the lines that William Lane Craig gives. But if I can just read, because Craig has put it really briefly too, how Craig gets there, and then I'll sort of bring up a concern I have, which is once you have looked at the Kalam, and how do you start deriving from that the attributes of the cause? Craig has written that this cause must be itself uncaused, as you said, as it's been seen an infinite series of causes impossible, therefore it's an uncaused first cause. And then, as you mentioned, it must transcend space and time, since it created space and time. And then you also mentioned this, therefore it must be immaterial and non-physical. And here, it must be unimaginably powerful, since it created all matter and energy. And then there's another proposition about how it must have been a personal being with free will that I'd like to get to as well. But just backing up, I'm fine with sort of the first A and B of that. Let's just posit that it transcends space and time, and it's uncaused. But I would like to talk about when the theist is saying it must be like unimaginably powerful, as Craig puts it, since it created all matter and energy. That strikes me as really trying to shoehorn in a characteristic that you already associate with a God, to sort of, you're really trying to load the dice to get there. I don't see why I need to accept that it must be some unimaginably powerful being. Let's see, where is it? I had a comment about that. Well, anyway, it's because where does that come from? It doesn't seem of logical necessity, because just proposing that a simple and not very powerful entity caused a large effect like the universe, there doesn't seem to be any logical contradiction in that I can see. Then where else would it come from? It would come from our experience that it takes powerful things to cause large or complex or powerful effects. And there, again, I don't see why that is necessary. And our experience seems to me to sort of indicate, if anything, the opposite is available. Because it seems like when you look at, like for instance, take the coronavirus, the pandemic, right? You could cast that as an incredibly powerful entity or effect. It's brought the world to its knees, right, for over years. And then you say, well, whatever caused this must have been enormously powerful to bring the world to its knees. I mean, it's just incredible. But really, if you trace back the cause and effect, it really traces back to a pathogen developing a mutation, right? And which allows it to survive and replicate, et cetera. So it didn't take anything huge and powerful to create it. It simply took a really simple and not terribly powerful cause to begin a cumulative process that caused it. And it just seems to me over and over that kind of tracing back of seemingly complex, large effects to simpler causes or simpler entities just seems to keep happening everywhere. You could say the same thing about, you look around at the world and
I'd actually
yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, we got that. I
You got the
understand
gist.
your objection there. Yeah, so I was gonna let Blake at least answer one. Maybe we can go like one objection
great,
at a
great.
time type thing. Yeah,
Yeah, that
that'd be
might
great.
work. Be smoother.
Yeah.
normally I wouldn't want to jump in. The only thing is I'm not necessarily wanting to defend, Craig's sentence there.
Okay.
For me, as I'm trying to think of the grander topic of, God fitting the bill in the colloquial sense of like, hey, being a really good explanation or the best explanation. Again, I'm wanting to frame it more in terms of, kind of the everyday common man sense of running into this sort of argument and thinking, holy moly, this, like, all this stuff that theists said was true turned out to be true. There's that famous quote from Robert Jastrow. I don't know if you've encountered it before, but he basically he wasn't approaching it from the philosophical side, but from the scientific side, and it's something like, the scientist has been climbing the mountain of ignorance for such and such a long time. He's finally pulling himself over the final peak, and bam, he's greeted by a band of theologians that have been sitting there the whole time. It's talking specifically about atheistically inclined cosmologists and physicists. So for me, whenever you have a confirmation of a theory in science, you're never confirming every element of the theory. What you have is a theory that gets on the table and it has certain predictions, and then those predictions get fulfilled. And that's what happens with the God hypothesis. Is this theory people have, for various different reasons, including personal experience, and there's a bunch of it, like mountains of literature written on it, that have people talking about this, what they think is this very clean, simple God hypothesis, this greatest possible being, this person with unlimited power and knowledge and the great making properties.
Which is not predicted.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. You can take that out of it. That's a God characteristic that you can now remove unless you have some sort of objection to what I just said. That seems to be a pretty big part of the God hypothesis.
What I'm trying to get at is this God hypothesis, the perfect being hypothesis, was on the table prior to any scientific discoveries. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but I don't think that matters.
Okay, well, let's come back to that, because a lot of people would, and that's important to come back to. So I don't want to divert it, but most people, I think, would say this hypothesis was on the table, and that is important, because when you've got a hypothesis on the table that's making these sorts of predictions, and then it goes and it gets fulfilled, that is, in typical, you can formalize it in Bayesian confirmation theory. You can even quantify the amount of evidence based on how expected the predictions are. This is data that is very surprising, would be very surprising if theism weren't true. That's why nobody expected it. But theists did expect this uniquely on the basis of the hypothesis that they were working with. And so while I don't want to say it's a proof of God, evidence is never proof, I would want to say, like, hey, this should really give someone pause if they hadn't really considered the God hypothesis to be very plausible before. But anyways, maybe you can explain to me why wouldn't it be relevant?
Well, so far, if we're going through what these traits are, we've got an uncaused cause that doesn't have any personal attributes of a God. If we're just going to if we're going to do whatever the cause was, we're going to call it God. I don't find that too interesting. I think we're trying to get to something that is like a personal being of the type that is useful to.
We're talking about fulfilled predictions. So it's kind of like I don't have to. A police officer coming to my door. He's got properties. He's got a badge. He'll have a police car. He's going to have a bunch of stuff. And if I'm saying, hey, I predict that a police officer is going to come to the door, on the basis of this or that. Let's say I'm expecting one to come because someone called the police. Okay. Mm-hmm. And now someone's coming to my door, and my son's over there, and he's saying, hey, someone's coming to the door. And I don't know if it's a police officer. It could be a neighbor. It could be anyone. Police officer didn't tell me the time that he'd be coming over. Basically, it wasn't an emergency call, let's say, but he's saying, yeah, it's a police car. He's wearing a badge. Now, have I proven that it's a police officer? No, I haven't proven all of the properties. But because that officer hypothesis was on the table, these now count as fulfilled predictions, and each one increases my level of confidence that, yes, this is a police officer. In the same way, I wouldn't expect every argument or evidence for God isn't going to get every single property of God's. But if you believe in God, you would expect arguments to start pointing out features and saying, hey, these are the fulfilled predictions. Does that make sense? That's more of how I think about it.
Well, it's still not getting. You're just establishing a cause, right? That the universe had a cause, and that's good enough to say it was God.
No, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't.
But that's what I'm trying to get to. How we get to God, and I don't. It may be an attribute of supposedly of God to be uncaused or whatever, or outside of time and space and causing the universe. But I still don't see how you get to the general attributes of gods that we're looking for, including it being powerful. I just actually also want to, it seems to me, are you saying that all you want to be able to establish with this argument is that is a cause that is outside time and space? What do you think you can establish from this?
Travis I know Travis was trying to jump in.
Well, I hate to jump in to the conversation, but I'm wondering if it might be helpful if, like, for example, Rich, are you comfortable kind of going the abductive route that's saying, like, hey, we have this certain like piece of data, let's say, Big Bang cosmology, and what would, can we imply an inference to the best explanation for that data? Blake, is that kind of the route you're going, more of the abductive?
Abductive or inductive, and just here's our hypothesis, and we're accumulating like significant evidence for it. Yeah.
Right. And so I guess Richie's saying like something like, well, under theism, like, the Big Bang and there's certain scientific data would be an expected matter of course, given that hypothesis. And so he's kind of making like an inference to the best explanation. And so do you kind of want to go that route, or did you?
Well, no, you're exactly right, Travis. Rich, I think, or Rick, I think what you're trying to say is you're expecting me to make to with this one argument to kind of prove all of the attributes of God. That'd be wonderful. I mean, and I do make cumulative cases that I think can prove, this and that, but I don't want to deviate from how I'm trying to present the argument, and how cosmological arguments regularly are presented as this strong confirmation of theism.
I just can't see it as any sort of strong confirmation.
Sorry, I'm using a technical term. By confirmation, I'm not meaning like not leaving room for doubt. I'm using.
Understood.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I still don't see it. I'm not sure. I'm still unclear as to what you are establishing then. How much are you saying that you are establishing from, for instance, the Kalam argument about the cause of the universe?
Here's how you'd usually ask that question: is on the hypothesis of atheism, and I mean like in the academic sense of atheism, where theism, you're asking the proposition, does God exist? Theism answers yes, atheism answers no to the question of God's existence. So I'm defining it right there, what I mean by atheism. And I say that because there are some people who have tried to put out a looser understanding. But anyways, now the question is on atheism, would you predict or expect there to be a beginning? And if so, what else would you predict alongside that? What sorts of things would you expect there to be? And, we've got a lot of history to answer that question. And no atheists were taking seriously the idea of a beginning. I mean, we've grown callous and used to it by now, the idea of a beginning, because of the deliverances of cosmology. But if you could like get back into where they were, it was just everything in our experience says things have always just gone on and in cycles even. And there's a regularity to things. The idea that there would be a beginning is, it's hard for the modern mind to even wrap your mind around now, because
most things have beginnings.
What's that?
We see beginnings to things all the time. I don't see why this is so unintuitive.
To the natural world. So I'm thinking more in terms of like sun, the sun comes up, the sun comes down, kind of regularities of the grander scope. And again, you can look to history to just see how naturally unexpected this sort of phenomena would be on atheism. Again, both in terms of none of them talking about it, and two, the sheer amount of shock expressed when it was discovered. And the power of this is in Bayesian inference. You can tell how much evidence something is for something else on the basis of comparing expectations. How unexpected, think of a murder trial. This is how a Bayesian would think of evidence. So you have a murder trial, and we're asking, is John guilty or not? Okay. And now, lo and behold, we have a new piece of evidence, a new piece of data. And it turns out that we have these fingerprints, or what look like fingerprints, on the murder weapon. In fact, they would match exactly John's fingerprints if they are fingerprints, and they're highly, highly specific. And then intuitively, we would say, okay, that counts as evidence that John's the murderer, pretty darn strong evidence. And then you ask why? Why is that evidence that John's the murderer? And the Bayesian answer, and I think, non-controversially, the correct answer is that because it is very expected, or it's not very unexpected that you would find this on the murder weapon if John were guilty. It fits. It's very plausible. There's no surprise there. By contrast, to find this piece of data exactly arranged like this on the murder weapon if John were innocent is going to be far, far lower, incredibly low. And you take that disparity and you compare them, and that's how you get your Bayes factor. That's how you find out how much evidence it is. And that's all I'm doing here is I'm saying on atheism, this is very surprising. This is very unexpected. Whereas on theism, to bring up that Jastrow quote again, they were a band of theologians sitting there the whole time saying, you should have expected this. This is what we were saying. And so I don't want the argument to come off as some very hyper-specific proof. I don't think we get proofs in everyday reasoning for the rational man, but I do think we get powerful evidences. And I was thinking that this, for me, it carried a lot of weight.
Well, okay, so as far as predictions, so what I'm left wondering is you were claiming that, for instance, and I'm still keeping the Kalam in mind, for instance, that claiming that the universe, for instance, had a beginning is some prediction of theism. But I would like to see how, because we're not assuming Christian theism and therefore the Christian story or anything like that. And if you posit, for instance, a perfect being, a God, I don't see how that predicts that, number one, God, who if is perfect, which seems to me suggests self-sufficiency to begin with, I don't see why that predicts God would create anything, much less that a immaterial being would decide to create a material realm, material universe. That doesn't seem to be any obvious prediction at all. It seems to me that God could have decided not to create a universe. And so the appearance of a universe in that sense seems to be compatible with the existence of a God or no universe whatsoever. So I don't see how it's a prediction of the universe beginning, much less existing.
So you can approach this both from, there's two ways to approach this. The first one would be the fact that there's contingent stuff that exists that didn't have to exist. Do you believe that there's stuff that exists that didn't have to exist?
Yes.
Okay. And then
is there stuff that exists that didn't have? Wait, sorry. Yes. Let's roll with it. Yes.
Okay. But the God hypothesis as the greatest possible being is understood as a necessary being, one that couldn't have failed to exist. And so if you have a necessary being and then you've got all this contingent stuff, the connection is made that this basically God is the necessary foundation of all the contingent stuff. So in other words, contingent stuff couldn't just come to exist on its own by itself. So the inference has always been that there is a necessary being behind the contingent segment of reality. That would be one reason why theists just did understand God to be the creator.
But that doesn't sound like that's not a prediction that there is a God. That's a working backwards from the evidence to therefore there is a God. So that's not a prediction, as I see it. I thought we talked about the Kalam, for instance, where the Kalam, for instance, there's a prediction that the universe would have had a beginning from theism. That's what I'm looking for. I'm not seeing that.
In this case, I am talking about the Kalam because people didn't know that the universe had a beginning. And in this case, I'm talking about, like, how do we explain why there is something here instead of nothing? That's not necessarily a question about the beginning. That's more of the Leibnizian leaning way. And people have always asked, why is there something rather than nothing? Even people who didn't know if there was a beginning or not, but nevertheless, they would anticipate that that theists would uniquely expect there to be an explanation in terms of God. All this stuff is here is because there's this necessary foundation. It's like the number 2. The foundation could not have failed to exist, and that foundation is the explanation of all this contingent stuff. So that would lead you to, I think, that's part of the reason why theists just did think that there was a grand creator that explained it all.
It seems like I'm still not seeing that as a predictive thing. It seems to be working the other way. Like I said, you're looking at the empirical evidence and working to say therefore this suggests there's a God. You're not starting with the proposition that there's a God and saying this predicts, like I said, the existence of the beginning of a universe, when God could have chosen not to create a universe. I'm still not seeing the prediction in there.
Well, I'm not saying that people didn't infer God's. What gets the God hypothesis on the table in the first place? People point to different things that get that hypothesis on the table. So I'm not, trying to exclude, the idea that the God hypothesis gets on the table from evidence. What I'm trying to say is that the Kalam evidence wasn't there yet. So however the God hypothesis gets there, I'm giving you one way. Or I shouldn't say however, one way that the God hypothesis did get there is as people are looking around at the world and asking, why is there something rather than nothing? We don't know there's a beginning yet. I'm not pointing to the Kalam evidence. That's going to come way later. Mm-hmm. But the fact that there's a world here of contingent stuff that didn't have to be here, that can lead people to believe that there's this necessary foundation and that there is a contingent world that owes its explanation to a creator. Okay, that is one way that the God hypothesis was circulating.
Okay, so you're saying the word creator there, right? Those are the attributes that I'm looking to be established. Creator suggests
I'll establish it. Yeah, but the establishment comes later with the Kalam. That becomes the confirmation. I'm not confirming it. I'm just talking about what would get the hypothesis on one way that historically the hypothesis got on the table.
Yeah, like I said, I just don't see we're anywhere near a God still at this point.
We're not. It's not at a God. Again, that I'm trying to separate the evidence from the prior probability, from the initial hypothesis. Let me ask you, why do you think that theists for so long were talking about a grand creator who everything else depends on?
Well, because I think it's been an inclination for people. I'm glad you asked that. It's been an inclination for human beings to want to explain things, of course, right? We've got sort of an explanatory itch that we need to scratch because we want to understand the world and to have some sort of predictive power and control over what our actions cause, etc. So one very common way people have come up with explanations is, well, to come up with an explanation that if it were true, well, it would explain the observation. And sort of to sidetrack this, it's sort of like a facile version of explanation, where if you can posit something that would explain X, well, then I've explained X, right? And if you ever wonder the enormous, and I'm getting back to what you want me to answer, if you look at the enormous number of things people currently believe and have believed that are just, even contradictory in their explanations of the world, and they can't all be true. It's a real feature, I guess, to say it's a very non-scientific sort of way of thinking, where if you can posit an explanation for something, like even if you're a QAnon adherent, well, then I've explained it, and that goes into your toolbook of how the world is. So, but the problem is when you don't have ways of actually testing and vetting it from the alternatives. That's the problem. That's basically how I think science arose, to sort of address these sort of problems of variables and how to winnow our explanations from possible other explanations. So getting back to people positing what people had a tendency to make up explanations that something caused X. So if we look around the world, geez, how did everything come about? Well, something caused it to come about. And we'll make up a God, just like God caused the thunder and lightning and any number of similar anthropomorphic entities were always conjured as what seemed to me facile explanations for phenomena. There's nothing remotely surprising, it seems to me, that people are going to, people who also look to minds as causes will end up positing a mind of some sort of God as a cause of everything we see. It's not surprising at all to me.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Do you think that intuition, rational intuition, is a way to know things? Can it give us reasons and evidence to believe in something?
I'm very suspicious of intuitions, although at bottom it seems like we do have to sort of resort to them at some point. Even when we're questioning our intuitions, we're probably relying on some other intuitions. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So like, you probably believe that there's an external world outside of your mind, that this isn't all just your dream world with nothing to wake up to. Do you believe that?
Yes.
Okay. And do you have any evidence for that?
No, it's well, sorry. Yes, in a way. It's sort of the more parsimonious. I mean, there's logical. I mean, the problem with, like, for instance, like hard solipsism is that the suggestion is compatible with everything I see. It's not suggested by everything I see. So I think you end up using strategies like parsimony as, for instance, a parsimonious strategy, like things are as they seem unless there are reasons to doubt or to think otherwise.
Well, that's a principle, and you can employ that principle too to try to address it. But then that kind of pushes the question back to the principle, because if solipsism is true, then are things, is it true that things are as they seem?
No. That's what I said. That's why I very carefully call it a strategy. Okay. It's a pragmatic strategy. It's not a truth claim.
Yeah, and the thing about pragmatic is if the goal is to get truth, it may not be pragmatic. Maybe you're just deceiving yourself. Anyways, I don't want to get too deep into it, because I think you probably agree you're going to have to rely on rational intuition for a lot of things, including, solipsism. Most philosophers will say, look, you've got to depend on. That's just one of those things that you're going to have to depend on rational intuition for. There's a big list. Let me go through like some of the other ones that you're going to regularly encounter in philosophy. So like,
I was just going to say, gentlemen, before you get too far afield, I was just going to say, hey man, this is your guys' conversation. If you want to go down any rabbit hole, you're more than welcome to. But I'm just letting you know, it's your conversation.
Well, here's the what I'm ultimately going to get to is that there is a well substantiated God intuition that is shared cross culturally, both for smaller type deities, for intelligences, but also more grandly for a great mind. And it's important to say that in philosophy, your intuitions are a key component of establishing the prior probability of hypotheses. So the idea of a God has been resting in people for a long time, and that God of this idea of a greatest possible being that's the foundation of reality is if you can ask people cross-culturally, is that like a crazy idea, like this unheard of sort of notion, like a flying spaghetti monster, or is it something altogether different? Is it more like the hypothesis that numbers exist? And people will say it's a lot more like the hypothesis that numbers exist. It's a lot more like the hypothesis that that there are actual real possibilities in the world. I asked Rick, do you believe that there are possible things that don't happen, that could have happened? Well, that's something you could never establish just using your empirical observations. That's obtained through reason. Moral facts are also things that, you go around the world and ask people, are there facts that transcend personal opinion, that are, saying what you ought to not do, or things that are good or evil? And again, this is a very common intuitive thing. God goes in that category. And so now when we come along and obtain this new evidence that, holy smokes, there's, suppose that the theory that there are objective moral values, suppose that it had predictions, that there are things you would expect from it. Then when you come across that evidence, it would ideally be a really powerful confirmation of that hypothesis. And that brings us back to, Rick's question is like, hey, is the idea that God is a creator, is that part of the hypothesis of God? And I guess I just want to say, yeah, that is part of the traditional understanding of God. He is a greatest possible being, but right, also included in that package is that God is the causal explanation of everything outside of himself. So,
okay, so how I would respond to that is that as I said, we're going to be appealing to and relying on intuitions at some point, but I think that has to be taken in the much wider context of our knowledge and experience, which counsels us to be very careful about relying and trusting on certain intuitions. So it's sort of akin to the how many axioms or assumptions do you want to make in your your epistemology or whatever, et cetera. Basically, it seems a good idea to reduce them as much as possible. Otherwise, you're not going to be open to alternative realities, et cetera. So in the same way, any reliance on intuition, I think we would want to be as careful about as possible and reduce to a minimum as much as possible. Mm-hmm. And when somebody is appealing to an intuition, they're still going to have to look at that justification given the wider body of observations we've made, and including about that type of intuition. Like, so for instance, the intuition about, well, first of all, like, I don't have the intuition right now that I am moving at all. I seem to be sitting still on what seems to be a flat plane, that kind of stuff like that. But in fact, I'm spinning around the globe, whatever it is, around 1,000 miles per hour or whatever. So, I mean, the wider world of facts and observations says, that intuition is not holding very well. Likewise, people have had so many intuitions of a sort of to attribute causes to gods and similar sort of supernatural entities that have proven to be, if not just untrue, at least unfounded when new, better explanations came in. So I think I don't have to give many examples. The whole lightning caused by God, and people have been wrong, or their intuitions have been replaced by better, more fruitful, more reliable explanations, natural explanations, so often that I think appealing to an intuition when it comes to God is on very, very thin ground.
Good. I just so you know, and to back up and be clear about what I'm trying to say, I'm not trying to say, hey, there's this widespread intuition of God, therefore you should believe in God. I mean, that would be so fast and bad. Of course. Precisely yes. For the reasons you're talking about. What I'm rather trying to say is that, in that scenario when I spoke about the police officer, I tucked in something that helped put the hypothesis on the table that that the object that my son is referring to is a police officer. Because I'm expecting a police officer to come sometime today. I don't know when. I mean, any number of people could come to my door today. But the idea is the hypothesis is on the table. And what I'm trying to do in talking about intuition, or I'm trying to talk about that's another way to do it, is revealed religion. Someone testifies to have encountered God, and he says, look, that here are the properties of God. This is nowhere close to justifying belief in God, but it does, as you analyze it from this Bayesian perspective, it increases the prior probability. Whereas the prior probability before could have been like 0.0000000, some insanely low number with a 1 at the end, or at the beginning, depending on how you look at it. That's where it starts. But even the smallest thing, like someone testifying to you that it's the case, or it being intuitive, these sorts of things can bring that number way up. It could bring it to just 0.0001. And once it's at 0.0001, around there, then you can start looking at real confirmations. If I gave you a piece of, like, for me, the flying spaghetti monster right now is a 0.0000001. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you try to give me some piece of evidence for the flying spaghetti monster, I'm having to multiply that number by 0.000. And even if you multiply it, it's still going to be an insanely small number. You're going to have amazing evidence to compensate for the low prior probability. That's and what I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to do for you is not trying to make a case, hey, you should think God's existence is probable right here and now because, hey, the intuition is really common, and hey, people have testified to encountering God and whatnot. No, that's way too fast. What I'm trying to do is, hey, there is a non-negligible probability for the idea of God as a greatest possible being, a foundation of reality that created everything else. And I'm not going to try right here now to give you all the arguments to prove each little property right now. I'm just focusing on the kalam that gets us a few of those properties. And I'm trying to say, guess what? On atheism, the expectation of that happening is insanely low, whereas on theism, it's quite high. And that means it's really good evidence. And you get to multiply that evidence by the prior probability for God. Okay. Now, if the prior probability for God is really low for you, that's something to talk about. But my hope would be that the God hypothesis is more plausible to you than it would be, for example, the flying spaghetti monster. And if you think the God hypothesis even has a 1% chance of being true, then the Kalam cosmological argument, or I should say the evidence that it uses, not Craig's deductive version, but the evidence that it uses should, it should have some impact. It should jump that number up a little bit more. And then I'll give you another argument that shows that other properties are the case, that other predictions of theism are true, and that could bump it up a little more. And that's how we all play the game of trying to come to true beliefs.
Oh, that was great. Thanks. So I do actually really want to double back on the nature of explanations and how that will bear on saying that God is the best explanation for instance, from Kalam, et cetera, at least the attributes that you are willing to, I guess, defend. Mm-hmm. But before I do that, from what you were saying, I'm just interested to ask you a question that I think will explain to me and maybe the audience a bit better about this nature of probabilities as you see it. So say somebody wins an extraordinarily improbable lottery, one of the Super Bowls, et cetera, right? Mm-hmm. And so when this person wins, that person declares, this must have been the act of a god. It's just that's the best explanation. It's just so improbable. Mm-hmm. It must have been God. Is that person justified in that? And if they're not, why aren't they justified in that?
Great. Here's why, is because the explanation in that case is ad hoc. And let me give you an example. So one of the most popular arguments for God, one of the hottest arguments, is this fine-tuning argument that, says, look, if the cosmological constant were off by 1 part in 10 to the 120th power, 120 zeros, then the universe would either collapse in a picosecond if it goes in one direction, or it expands so rapidly that you'd only ever get hydrogen and helium in the universe, and they'd be like a Hubble space, a whole universe's space apart from each other. Okay. Yes. And they'll say this is really, fits really well in theism. It's really unexpected on atheism. But here's I'm gonna outdo that argument. Watch this. I've got a phone here, and this phone has a very particular molecular structure. I mean, it's insanely, incomprehensibly improbable this phone. Okay. But guess what? I'm just going to ad hoc posit the idea of this phone God, and this God is not disinclined to create exactly this phone. And so now all of a sudden, have I come up with a really strong evidence for this phone God? The answer is yes, I do have really strong evidence for this phone God. Here's the problem. Every bit of that evidence is destroyed by the prior improbability of that God. Because think of all the possible ways that God could be. Yes. I mean, there's an infinity of objects out there, and there could be an infinity of this object, type gods. So for me to just yank out that one out of nowhere, all of them have this insanely low prior probability. That's why prior probability is probably the name of the game in our discussion here, because I want to say that the standard conception of God that I've been talking about, it doesn't have a very low prior probability. It's a lot more like the hypothesis that there's an external world, or that there are things that are objectively right or wrong. It's a lot more in line with natural human healthy intuitions. And there's revelation directly associated with it that gets it for many people to that 1% and well beyond. The prior probability is not crazy for the God hypothesis, whereas it is crazy for the phone God hypothesis. Does that make sense?
Yes, I can see that. It's interesting that you bring that up to the fine tuning, because it's always seemed to me, and from what I've read to others, that it's a bit of a strange argument too, because I mean, if you look at if unnaturalism, the cosmological constants, if you say, well, maybe they could have been any number of different ways, so maybe you got a number 1 over some incredibly large number of different ways it could be. Well, that's really improbable and not predicted. But then if you're talking about a supreme being who could create anything any way, how in the world is that? There's a countless possibilities for how he could have made the universe, not necessarily just those constants as they are. So it seems like if 1 over the same incredibly large number doesn't even really give you much of a leg up on
yeah, I don't want to defend. I
know. So we won't get into that.
Bring up a different argument. I was trying to make an illustration to say, hey, I'm not being inconsistent. Like, there's a difference here.
So I like to get back to sort of the nature of explanations and how I think. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, on how it bears on what we're getting from something like the Kalam, or maybe even another cosmological argument. So let's take this. I was just watching Justin Brierley's YouTube video recently again. I think put it out in 2020 when COVID came on and started wrecking the world, right? And I believe that the title was sort of like, why doesn't God stop COVID? And what he basically got to was a theme of what could account for natural evil, like COVID, and it sort of mimicked what even I think Atlantica has said, where when you come up with explanations for the moral argument for God, right? How it's necessary that human beings can choose evil, therefore free will, the free will argument. But then you've got the problem with natural evil. Free will doesn't seem to explain natural evil. And then sort of Plantinga has said things like, well, in that case, there could be the devil and his minions involved in sort of natural evil. And so there's this...
Just so you know, I got to say this because I won't get a chance. He was saying, look, if you're making a logical problem of evil, I can make up, any sort of explanation to explain why God would do it. The logical problem fails. He doesn't use that for the evidential problem.
I know the law. I absolutely know it. Yeah, that's not what I'm getting at. But I'm just saying, as an explanation kind of thing for, as a possible explanation for natural evil, there seems to be this, some Christians like Justin were suggesting the cosmic battle kind of thing. And that somehow, here I'm getting to the nature of explanations and some problems with the supernatural as explanation, that somehow, for instance, we could attribute things like the coronavirus to the free will of some malevolent supernatural agents. Now, it's left incredibly vague about that, but just that style of explanation appealing to the supernatural. I think there's a reason why our most epistemologically responsible empirical method, which I'd say is the scientific method, hasn't adopted supernatural explanations, because they don't really make for very good explanations or fruitful explanations. So what can Justin bring to the scientist studying the coronavirus? What new predictions can he bring? How does he change his work? From evolution theory, it limits what the scientist can see as far as the changes. He goes home, he leaves his pathogens under the microscope and comes back the next day. They're not going to change drastically. But if you posit a supernatural possible causation to things like coronavirus, you have to give some account as to what their power is, what their limitations are. Why can't the scientists come back and suddenly expect the entire DNA to have changed if some supernatural causation is happening? There's just no limit to it. It would explain any possible observation, therefore it doesn't seem to explain any, and it doesn't seem to predict, therefore, any particular thing. So it's just sort of a useless type of explanation, but it's one of those scratches the explanation itch that seems to allow, Sir Justin Sarah to sort of kind of put that on the shelf a bit. That could explain things. So in the same respect, when we're talking about God as the, quote, best explanation for cosmological arguments, once you've opened that gate to that style of explanation, it doesn't seem to shut very easily. You seem to have opened up the explanation space exponentially. And then how do you deal with the competing explanations that essentially posit magic? I mean, like the supernatural functionally seems to be no different than magic. Some sort of things happen non-mechanistically, non-materially. There's no way really of explaining the mechanism. So I would use the term almost magic, because when you say supernatural, people will tend to glom onto that a personal or sentient entity. So that's why I'm using the term magic. So it sounds that what the explanation is for the universe is, well, we've got the beginning of the universe. The cause, we now have to posit a cause outside of the universe that has the characteristic or capability of being outside space and time and causing universes. This seems to be the typical style of explanation of, well, if I can think up an explanation, they would explain it. Well, there you go. That's a live possibility. But I can just posit that, that a magic seed caused the universe. It has no attributes normally associated with the God. But how did it happen? Magic. I mean, once you tell me how your external cause caused things, and I'll tell you how my magic seed caused things. So I don't see why I have to accept that these attributes are godlike. You can posit anything that magically causes things. It just has the attribute you need it to do.
Yeah, and so I don't know if I'll get to address all of that, but one connected theme though goes directly back to what I was trying to say before. It really boils down to the prior probability. The God hypothesis, in explaining the beginning of the universe, when we discovered that, holy crap, there is a beginning. We didn't just think up God on the spot there. The God hypothesis was already, for the types of reasons I was bringing up, it was on the table. That's why it functions more as a fulfilled prediction than a thinking up of. And let me ask you, I mean, do you think that all explanations are mechanical?
Not necessarily, but can I just double back on what you were just saying? Just quickly, because the prior probability, you keep casting it as a prediction, and therefore it has a leg up. But I don't think that this is what I was referring to at the very beginning of the conversation. I don't think the idea that this predictive aspect you want to give it helps, because not so long as you have another competing explanation. So if there were colds that we knew or that we proposed caused sore throats, the explanation of colds, the common cold, may have been on the table long before the coronavirus showed up. But if now that we can propose that the coronavirus also causes a sore throat if somebody says, well, the sore throat, the cold is the better explanation because it was around before coronavirus. It predicts the sore throat. So that's really the better explanation. No, it doesn't matter whether you had that before. If you have an alternative explanation that can explain it as well, you still have to show why you've got more confidence in one over the other. And it's the same thing. If I can propose an entity that can cause the universe, it doesn't matter whether it was around a long time before, along with the Kalam, you have to be able to show me why I should feel compelled to accept yours over any other magic things I can say exist outside of time and cause universes.
I agree with what you're saying about colds, but I kind of feel like you would more be in the position of the one saying that, well, even though the symptoms of the cold are all there, that this isn't, when the person displays the cold symptoms, it's not even evidence that they have a cold. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it boils down to. There is, in this illustration, there is no analog to the coronavirus because there's no better explanation for.
No, but that you're begging the question. I'm asking you to show me that God is the better explanation. That's what I'm asking him. Well, if I propose a magic seed or or just a force that or anything, and simply use the "and then a miracle occurs" type of explanations that you are appealing to, I don't see how you are justified in doing it, and I'm not.
What you just did is you created an ad hoc hypothesis, and that has an incredibly, unimaginably low prior probability. There's also incoherencies in like a seed fitting.
No, but it's not. Sorry, but it's not ad hoc because if we're talking about, for instance, the going back to the cold. So if colds are already known to exist, and then the coronavirus is known to exist, neither, of course, are going to be an ad hoc hypothesis. But if there were sore throats, and then somebody proposes that, hey, this could be caused by a cold virus, I mean, that still doesn't matter if somebody can come along and say that, no, actually, it could also be caused by a coronavirus. If your evidence for the cause is the effect, then that effect is also evidence for another possible cause. There's no sort of prior predictive thing happening there that gives you a leg up on another possible explanation. So I just don't see any leg up here in saying that, well, somebody came up with this idea of a God before. Well, I'm coming up with a magic idea now, and it competes with it.
I might be a little confused about what you're doing. I'm a little lost, I think.
Okay. Well, you were saying there was no analog between using the analogy of a cold and two different possible causes, and you were saying that there was a pre-existing hypothesis for effects already, for effects that were already there, essentially for phenomena that was already there. You've got a phenomenon, which is our universe, and then you had a pre-existing hypothesis explaining the universe. You're trying to say, therefore, it's more predictive. Is that wrong?
Maybe my brain's not working.
Yeah, please help me.
So I kind of see the disconnect here with explanations, and so Rich is kind of saying, well, hey, why can't I posit any kind of competing explanation, and I think something along those lines. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if it might help if we kind of look at this, kind of like how they would do a scientific hypothesis of its theoretical virtues, like which explanation is more simple, which would unify various aspects of reality, which is going to be, posit the less amount of brute facts and ad hoc, complexity to explain the theory. Would that kind of help? Like,
I think that would be like, especially if we're asking the broader question, does God exist? We would want to apply all of those questions, in looking at all of the data, both for and against. You can, in this situation, I'm doing something more modest in pointing out that this can be substantial evidence for an hypothesis, whether it's enough to justify belief in God is going to be person relative. It's going to have a lot to do with how plausible do you think it is that God exists. If someone's in a position where they're like really 50-50 agnostics about whether God exists, and then they encounter for the first time, as many people did, 50 years ago, that hey, the universe had this grand beginning, that person, in light of that, can see a fulfilled theistic prediction and be like, oh yeah, that's holy smokes. I mean, that'll do it for them. But if someone thinks that God virtually instantiates contradictions, even fine-tuning levels of evidence may not do the trick for them.
Right.
So
you're
sometimes,
kind of going with a
like,
likelihood comparison.
Yeah, and then sometimes there's like one argument that really just settles with somebody. What I find interesting here is that you both have come full term with this. I think that we should move into a time of some questions and answers if you guys are willing.
Sure.
Can I just finish off one last thing there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to give you guys both a closing statement before we head off too.
But if I would just say quickly, so once again, the idea, as I understand it, is that theism predicted, say, for instance, the beginning of the universe, or predicted even or is an explanation, the best one, because we were talking about being abducted.
Just so you know, theism predicted that there would be a cause of the universe that has all these special properties.
Well, yes, but once again, if somebody can come up with something that explains the same phenomena with this alternative with different properties, or that doesn't necessarily have all of God's properties, then as I keep saying, it just doesn't matter whether it comes prior or not.
It matters. Ad hoc hypotheses come cheap.
Yeah, but you know what I also think, though? I think if you have a cumulative case for your seed and you're willing to produce that evidence and it does comport to everything we see in reality, I think that then you have the right to create a competing worldview. Absolutely.
No, but the problem is that. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you finished.
But no. Is that something that? I mean, that's just where I agree with you on that aspect. Yeah, you should be able to insert a competing hypothesis.
Yes,
but it's not ad hoc, right? Because if two hypotheses explain the same observations, then neither are ad hoc in that way. You have to show how one hypothesis better explains versus the other. And that's what I'm sort of looking for. Once you start using the sort of magic, if I just propose that this entity has this power to cause a universe, well, then that's the explanation. Well, so could a magic seed or just a force that has the characteristics of being able to cause universes outside of time and space, or that kind of stuff. Like I'm saying, I just don't see
what's the prior probability of the magic seed? Let's talk about the prior probability.
What's the prior probability of I don't think I don't see there's any prior probability of God.
Unlike we can talk about the God hypothesis and the prior probability of that, and I think that if you're let's talk about the magic seed first. I mean, you're talking about it seems like a spatiotemporally it's a seed. It has extension, so it's located in space and time.
No, it's a magic seed.
I don't know what that means.
Yeah, I don't know what supernatural means either.
Okay, then throw out the word supernatural. I'm not using it.
Right. Well, I don't understand what a sort of a mind outside of time and space means either. You know what I mean?
I don't. I think that people can have a very clear conception of what a mind is.
Not outside time and space. Not me.
Well, in philosophy, a mind is a center of consciousness. You can be in a state of self-awareness. In fact, right now, you can imagine, Rick, imagine right now that time froze. Okay. And not just that, but erase all of the time before you and all of the time after you, so that you only have a single frame. Okay. A timeless state. You would still be a person. in that timeless state. The past and the future doesn't make you a person. It's the faculties that you have right now that make you a person.
Oh, I'm not sure. Maybe it's the way that was explained that I don't feel I agree, because it sounded like you were talking about a person frozen in time, which doesn't sound like a person to me. But maybe I misunderstood.
No, a person frozen in time would still be a person.
I just don't see any reason to accept that.
Are you a person right now?
Yes, I am going through time. Yes.
Well, but even
But you're saying at any particular time, are you a person?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that it can be reduced to a single point in time. I'm not convinced of that. What length of time? I'm not sure. Maybe it's the length of time needed to be able to hold and process some thoughts.
I think that at any point in time, you're undergoing an experience.
Mm-hmm.
You have a mental state at any time slice.
Mm-hmm.
Point time. You are undergoing an experience. You are a person.
But it seems to me that if you slice that time down to a small enough time, that I'm not having an experience. I can't see that I would be having an experience if you freeze the time too small. I don't see any reason to accept that.
This should be even clearer. Are you a mind-brain identity theorist or anything? I mean, do you think that the mind depends on the brain and that's all there is?
Well, there seems to be a mind-brain dependence, and I haven't seen. It seems most of how we operate when it comes to treating people and their thoughts and any problems they're having with them, for instance, Alzheimer's, etc. There's just so much mind-body. Here's
what I'm going to get to. If you freeze the brain at one particular point, there should be a corresponding experience. If I take your brain and I freeze it right now, the experience that you're having right now, if there's a one-to-one correlation between what's physical and what's non-physical, you should have the exact experiences and everything that you're having right now. It's all frozen together. And it doesn't matter what comes before or after. You're an experiencing entity at that point, and whether you're at the beginning of time or what, you'd still be a person.
I just don't accept that. I mean, it seems to me personhood has to do with, for instance, sentience and thinking through propositions and that kind of stuff like that, which seems to occur through time. If you freeze me to a degree where that's not occurring anymore, I don't see that as personhood. I see that as a dead person.
Okay, even if you don't agree with me, can you see how lots of rational people would agree with me and that what I'm saying at least isn't crazy?
No, it's not crazy. No, I'm not going to say that, of course. No, I don't think philosophical arguments are crazy.
Well, I mean, what I'm ultimately getting to is like there's a big difference between what I'm saying and just calling it magic. I mean, I don't think that what I'm talking about is magic. Maybe even if you don't ultimately think philosophically that fits with your worldview or that's the right way, lots of people do and would, and so I wouldn't compare it at that point to magic. And even if you ultimately decide that you want to call it magic, I honestly, magic is. I actually have a part on Belief Map talking about this. Magic is kind of just a derisive way to talk about something. It's not really. Nobody can even define magic. But I mean, even if you don't ultimately accept the hypothesis, the idea is that, hey, there's a lot of people who disagree with you. And hopefully, as you are a smart person trying to work out your own worldview, you can hold this hypothesis in the air and you can say, wait a second, the cosmological argument actually provides some really interesting evidence for this model over here. And even if I don't ultimately agree with the idea of a timeless person, maybe as more evidence accumulates, maybe it'll be a hypothesis that you're more attracted to over time.
Well, that's certainly possible. Of course, we always have to be.
Well, guys, I'm gonna have to jump in here.
Yeah.
Because I know we're about an hour and a half in.
Oh, okay.
And I do, and you know what, I try to keep it even around an hour and a half if I'm lucky, if I'm blessed, but I don't want to go over that. because then people start losing attention span, stuff
Yeah,
like that. But also, I am very grateful that both of you decided to come on here and talk.
Yeah.
And I am going to give you closing statements because I think this conversation is one that's needed and it's fascinating. But I do want to give some questions to first off to Blake. This comes from the Faithiest Atheist, our friend Rich. He says, would philosophy prove or disprove infinite beginnings or cosmology?
Would philosophy disprove infinite beginnings? What,
Or prove or
infinite,
disprove infinite
I
beginnings?
may not understand the question. I don't. Maybe y'all can help me. Is he maybe saying an infinity of beginnings? What are infinite?
What I think he's trying to say is, does philosophy have the power to prove or disprove something like
Like a
beginning of the
multiverse of
universe?
beginnings?
Yeah, like can it disprove the idea of an infinite regress, or can it prove an idea of an infinite regress, or that the universe began, or cosmology? So
I mean,
that's kind of like what
if
I'm
we're talking
thinking.
about something like a bouncing universe, like an oscillating universe model, where there are these like functional beginnings to that particular oscillation. I mean, that's coherent, but ultimately you're going to have a philosophical beginning, an absolute beginning, which is kind of what we're talking about. And I think you can philosophically demonstrate that. Yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking of Andrew Loke has a neat column that kind of looks at just like a philosophical beginning instead of a lot of the same.
All right, I'm going to get to the next one. I got to find it. All right. Question for you both. What do you think is the best argument the other has? We'll start with Rich this time.
Oh gosh, that sounds like a wide open question.
It is.
Where do I start? I guess the other, maybe Theus or Blake in particular.
I think it'd be for Blake's arguments that he's kind of presented.
Okay. I guess it strikes me that the best arguments that I could see are the ones that establish a cause for, say, first causes of various sorts. I think those are the best arguments.
Yeah.
And it's just the nature of the cause and getting to a God and a personal God that I'm very skeptical about. But I'm willing to go in for, I think those are the best part of the arguments, that establishing a cause.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if it would be called an argument, but I think that the stuff that you've talked about has honed in very successfully on the importance of talking about prior probability whenever someone wants to try to get you to a final probability. If someone wants to tell you, look, you should believe in God, or God should at least reach this level of probability in your mental scale, they can't do that work just by pointing to some evidence. That they've got to talk to you about other virtues of the hypothesis, like its simplicity and plausibility and so forth, and any prior evidence. All that needs to come into play. And I think you've honed very successfully although you haven't quite articulated it that way, I think you've honed very successfully into the importance of that aspect of making the argument.
Right on. Well, guys, those are the only two questions I really found that were pertinent. Some of them were just trolling looking comments, but definitely more comments in there. People talking about, the issues and stuff like that. But Travis, you got anything before we wrap up here? I'm going to give these guys their final couple minutes.
No
questions.
I don't really have anything. Just really enjoyed the conversation. I really think you both did well. I think this is a very fascinating topic, and I like to play on the philosophy of science and how this was kind of discussed. Really good stuff.
So Blake, since we started with you, I'm going to let you give a quick closing statement, and Rich the last word after that.
Okay. I mean, all I have to say in closing is that I really appreciate the conversation. Rich didn't let down. It was really fun to kind of explore his thoughts, and I hope I don't know if you'd be up for it, but I enjoyed y'all are my friends. I mean, y'all are the kind of people I like to hang out with, and I love to have these conversations. So whether on or off air, let's do it. Let's chat some more. Cool. I like really want to talk about some of those other things you brought up, like if God exists, why are there apologists? Because I've done a lot of work on that kind of stuff, and there's lots of other evidences I'd love to throw your way and kind of get your thoughts on. So it's a big, wide open arena to explore with you sometime.
I guess I'll go. Yeah. So once again, thanks for having me on. And like I said, I was viewing this more as a atheist reacts kind of thing, and just sort of probing Blake's thoughts on these, and I just found lots of the responses really interesting and stimulating, and stuff to think about, and it's I really enjoyed it. I mean, I still hold my skepticism, which we didn't get to generally what I wanted to talk about, which was really trying to get to a personal God, and then how these play any sort of role in increasing the probabilities that, for instance, a resurrection would happen. I wouldn't want to get to an argument for the resurrection, all that kind of stuff. I just mean there just seems to be a gap there that I've never really seen crossed. But anyway, that'd be great, like for another show or something. But yeah, and then my skepticism still sort of revolves around that once you open the door to a style of explanation, then I find it's hard to avoid, I guess, special pleading to a degree. And then so I'll just stick with that for now. But in any case, I really, really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate it, Blake. And thanks for treating with kids' gloves. I had fun.
Right on,
Go
guys.
get your kids' gloves.
Well, guys, I mean, yeah, like I said, I mean, it's both great to have both of you on, and I thank you, audience. We got another video coming up as soon as I can download it. I was on the air with Tyler Fowler earlier today with paranormal investigator and exorcist Bishop James Long, and it turned out to be a phenomenal interview and real fun to do. So Tyler's let me put that up on PorA as well. So stay tuned for that. And there's much more good content coming your way. Next week, we'll be coming back on to have an open mic night on the problem of evil, which Blake and Rich, you both are invited to. You're more than welcome to pop in. Stay as long as you want and leave when you want. That's the type of thing an open mic night is. And Blake, if you like hanging out with nerdy theists like us, then you are more than welcome to come back here. Yes, and Rich, you as well. Always welcome on my show. I was telling Blake earlier, you're probably one of my favorite atheists to talk to. So
thank you very much. Thank you.
We love having conversations with you. And if you want to give me an idea for a show, and you want to type up something that you want to talk about, I'm more than willing to host it. Also, coming in February, I do guest host month, which means you'll be the moderator if you want to moderate a debate. So I always give that opportunity to people in February to do a guest host deal, and we work it out and put them up. So that's pretty much it for me tonight, guys. Like I said, stay tuned for the James Long interview from CSG. I do want to make sure I plug Tyler in on that. I always try to call him Travis because he looks like my friend Travis. Not you, Travis, but my other friend.
I was like,
they have like the same
resemblance, man.
They have the same goatee, and they always remind me of each other. But anyways, thanks again, guest. We are out of here, guys. Have a good day.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.